All right. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Assembly's Committee on Housing and Homelessness. It is 11:01, and we are noticed today from 11 to 12:30. Let's go ahead and do a roll call, please, Mr. Clerk.
Righty. Miss Allard? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Miss LaFrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Mr. Peterson? Miss Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Thank you. I don't know if I heard Miss Allard respond, but I do see that she is in the attendance list. Okay, so we have quite a full agenda today. So I'm going to go ahead and just get us rolling along, starting with initial audience participation. We did have one individual sign up, Mr. Oliva. If you are on a phone number, it's *6 to unmute yourself. You'll have 3 minutes, and I will time that on my end. Welcome. Again, Mr. Oliva, you did sign up for initial audience participation. So if you are here, if you're one of these phone numbers, it's *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, if not, then I'll go ahead and squeeze in Mr. Oliva at some point whenever he arrives and makes himself known. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and move on. And just for the record, there will be an opportunity for final audience participation at the end of our agenda today. Also, for folks who want to look at our agenda and the various documents, you can find all of these on the committee's website. If you just go to muni.org/assembly and go to the committee page, you will find all of these documents, the agenda, and a couple presentations. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start off our business items with our first item on the agenda, which is discussion on winter abatement. Earlier this morning, Assembly members should have received a email communication between myself and Ms. Demboski regarding a series of questions that I had asked regarding 2 different agenda topics on our agenda today, one of them being winter abatement, the other being Fema reimbursement. So with that, I will go ahead and just do a quick summary of the questions that were asked. And just an FYI, I'm getting a notice that I have a bad network quality. So if I'm going in and out, please someone let me know. So I'm just going to do a quick summary of the questions asked, and then I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Demboski. And I also understand that for at least the next 10 minutes or so, Mr. Derace is here. So the questions I asked were somewhat similar to the questions I asked last month regarding winter abatement, also a series of additional questions. So regarding whether winter abatement is occurring, when winter abatement first occurred, what triggered the allowance of winter abatement, what date did the Sullivan Arena change its capacity from 420 to 510 individuals? Why was this done? Did the administration request this capacity, or what was the rationale? Has the capacity at the Sullivan ever been reached? And if yes, did that lead to a pause on winter abatement? Is staffing at the Sullivan able to maintain its contractually required 30-to-1 ratio? Is the Sullivan able to maintain the CDC guidelines for mass care facilities with regard to social and physical distancing? A little bit, I asked the administration to expound on the goal and purpose of winter abatement. And if they could expound also on the differences or similarities between the process for winter abatement and summer abatement. At least that's what I call it, summer abatement. If different, can the administration please explain the differences? And then a series of questions regarding the abatement process. What kind of metrics are kept? Are social services provided? Is transportation provided? So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Naboski and Mr. Gervais to expound on any of the answers that you provided to the assembly. Just, I don't know, Mr. Turner, have you had a chance to put the responses on the website for the public to take a look? I know they were sent to the assembly.
Correct. I'm uploading them now. We just had some issues and OIT just resolved them, so I'm uploading them now.
Okay, so for members of the public, hopefully soon you'll be able to see the questions and the responses provided by the administration. I will note for the record, although I believe Ms. Allard was here from the beginning of the meeting, she did state in the chat that at 11:03 that she was here. So with that, I'll turn it over to the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if it'll be productive for me to go through and read the answers to every single question, but I will just kind of give a general update on some of the high points. Winter abatement postings have been happening since December, and that's specifically because we do have shelter capacity to do the abatement. As I stated in the last committee meeting, public safety is always our first and foremost criteria. So when we start seeing camps and areas that are a safety hazard, whether it's to the campers or to the public, we always prioritize those first. So those have been happening since about December. Again, what triggered the ability to do winter abatements is shelter capacity was available. And so again, we're prioritizing public safety first and helping people get into a safer environment. That's the whole goal. On what date you had asked, the Sullivan Arena changed its capacity from 420 to about 510, as indicated by the Health Department and Parks and Rec. Those are primarily the ones that were giving these answers. Shelter increase was a process involving multiple municipal departments, which also included the fire department, and the permit was part of the process. AFD helps monitor safety via the inspectors and the walkthroughs of the Sullivan Arena, which through those discussions and AHD through code and need, it was probably a few days before the 22nd of December in which the capacity actually changed. And then you asked, was the change in capacity done at the request of the municipal administration? The mass care team identified individuals needing shelter services. We had over 420 using the facility. So mass care started the above reference process with multiple departments to evaluate capacity and safety and need. And those actions directly were the result of this. This wasn't directed by somebody in City Hall. This was HD truly being proactive and trying to serve and shelter and help those that are the most vulnerable in our community. Then you also asked if there has been any days when the Sullivan has reached its new max capacity of 510. And according to the dashboard, I did not see any dates and when that happened. And I can certainly tell you in the past 30 days that has not happened. So as we move on, and you asked if we have maintained the vendor over there is 99+1. If we've met the contractually required 30-to-1 ratio, the answer is yes. HD receives staffing reports and verifies these reports routinely, and they're also monitoring in person and remote via CCTV feeds what's going on at the Sullivan. So Those staffing metrics have been met, and 899+1 is in contract compliance with those staffing requirements. Then let's just see. I'm trying to see some of your big ones because, again, I don't want to read all of this to you because I know you can read, and I don't want to waste your time. The difference, though, between summer abatement and winter abatement, the comment from the department is the difference is an increased focus on putting campers in touch with outreach while helping assure the campers they have all their belongings through the process. The approach has improved, according to Josh, and our interactions with the campers will continue for all seasons. So again, when we start looking at winter abatement, I would say some of the biggest highlights the departments have focused to me is we obviously realize as temperatures drop and people are out and exposed to the elements, it's really a very vulnerable situation for them. And so winter abatement truly is, again, about public safety and ensuring that those that are camping outside are aware of and recognize that they're safe, warm places that they can go. And so that has been the focus of our departments as they go forward. Let's see what else you have here. I think that kind of sums up the biggest questions that you have. And I know Director Durace is on the line for the first little bit of today's meeting. So, Joe, did you want to add anything to any of those comments that you think might be helpful?
Yes, ma'am. To the committee, I think another point worth pointing out as we discussed the 510 capacity. One of the points that I want to make is we like to note that this is registered guests. This isn't an actual, so when you see the dashboard, those are guests that are registered. So we have up to that point. A lot of the times people are at work, they're out doing things, they might be at a family member, but so there's very rarely, even when you see 480, there are not 480 people standing or sleeping at the Sullivan at that moment. And I like to point that out because that's just what has signed up for care there. And to be in the building, you have to be signed up. So there's very rarely, even when you see 480, that capacity being on the floor of the Sullivan. So I like to note that to people. The second piece is the question around staffing. I want you to be aware the 30-to-1 ratio, while we're currently meeting it for the 510, the contract only requires them to provide care for up to 420 people. So we have a pending to go before the assembly an amendment because they are caring for over 420 people and staffing for that, but their compensation ends at 420. The 30-to-1 ratio sets the compensation rate. So we will be coming before the assembly and having a further discussion on paying to have 510 clients in the shelter. I do need to note that because it is going to be a reoccurring issue that will come up very shortly in front of the assembly. And that would be the only two things that I really think we wanted to expand on. Also note that winter camp abatement is performed by Parks and Rec, obviously in conjunction with the health department, maintaining space at the Sullivan to that predicates the ability to do the camp abatement, but we don't have any role in the actual abatement process. That's a Parks and Rec function. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Municipal Manager, for the time to speak.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Durace. Thank you, Ms. Domboski. I'll go ahead and start going through the queue. So if folks have any questions, please put yourself in the chat. Start with Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Question. I noticed on the response to your emailed questions that there were two abatements that were done under 72-hour rules. Can you explain to us what qualified those particular abatements for swifter removal?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, I can follow up with Josh and ask him the specifics around those specific abatements.
Perfect.
He's on leave, yeah, so I'm not sure, but I will get the answer for you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and put myself in the queue then. These next two questions come specifically from community council leadership in one of my community councils. Two questions. One, is there a written plan for abatement? And second, is there a written schedule for when different parts of the municipality might be abated?
Thank you for the question. On the written plan for abatement, I'm not sure if anybody from the Department of Law is on, but that's a question. If they're not, I'm going to have to check with them because I know we've had discussions about written plans of abatement. So I'll just have to check. Is anybody on from the Department of Law?
Ms. Demboski, this is Patrick Burr from the Department of Law. Is Jessica Willoughby on? So that is something that Jessica has looked at and has done some work on. I can check in with her and see if we can't get an answer before the end of this work session.
Thank you, Patrick. And as far as the written schedule of plans, I think, you know, Josh has explained this. Josh Durand is the director of Parks and Rec, and he's explained this very well. And again, they can have areas of plans that they're going to go into this area and that area. But again, those plans of schedules can change based on public safety needs, and they do often. So that's one of those things where, as your community councils are having questions about when are you going to get to this area, sometimes it's situational. And I know other times we don't schedule, like on March 24th, we're going to go into this area. They go because other areas could all of a sudden propose or show a really significant public safety need. So I know those things can change. But I will double check with that one too and see what is the best way to get community council information about when those abatements are going to be occurring, because I'm suspecting, Mr. Rivera, that's kind of what your community council is wanting to know.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. That is their line of inquiry. They want to know, when is my part of town going to be abated? That tends to be the questions that we get from community councils. At least I will say I get from community councils.
Great question. I'll double check with Josh and figure out what's the best way for us to kind of highlight to community councils when it might be occurring, just as long as we manage expectations and realize that just because we say a specific day, there may be other needs that present themselves that divert resources for a short time.
Okay, great. And then I did have a couple of additional follow-ups to the responses that were given. And I'll just put these into the record. I understand if you might not be able to provide responses at this particular time. So first is, in one of the responses, I asked about the social services that are being provided. If you could just describe in more detail the types of services that folks have access to during the abatement process, that would be helpful. If there are any updates on the outreach questions that I asked, there were two questions in particular that I think you highlighted for follow-up needed from the outreach. That would be helpful if there are any responses that outreach may have at this point. And then regarding transportation, I would just love to hear a little bit more about sort of real world process of, you're in the process of abating. How does and someone wants to go to shelter, how does that work from, and in the response you said the health department has a contract for the non-critical transport. So if you could just explain a little bit about how that works.
Sure, thank you. And actually, I'll have Director Gerace actually comment on both of those items, because I think he probably will know off the top of his head.
Thank you, Municipal Manager. Yes, I do. So we have obviously this revolves around them not being medically fragile and needing to be horizontal. But if it's a standard transport situation, we have 3 vans 24/7. These vans will respond anywhere in the Anchorage Bowl and transport the folks to the Sullivan, which is our intake location. So additionally, there's lots of other ways people get there, from discharges from ERs, from social service providers using their vehicles, like Turnigan Social Club has a van. There's a multitude of ways people get there, but the city-funded program is what's called non-critical transport. And we have a fleet of minivans that run around town, taking people not just to and from the Sullivan, but to doctor's appointments and other such services. As you were asking about social services, we do provide all that non-critical transport around the Anchorage Bowl. And I'll stop right there, and just if you have any further questions on that, I could maybe get into specifics.
Thanks. No, that's a helpful overview. I'll go ahead and pause from my questions and then send it over to Mr. Weddleton, and then I'll go back in the queue.
Oh, thanks. So, Mr. Drace, that is interesting. So, I think the like the community service patrol is only north of Tudor, but you've got vans that'll drive people. So, if someone, down, south of Tudor, I guess anywhere, gets a call, or I mean, what would trigger someone south of, or some, I guess anywhere in the city, getting a van to bring them to the Sullivan or somewhere?
A bunch of things. It could be APD or ASP on scene requesting that. It could be maybe they're in a doctor's office where they sought care or follow-up care and they need to go back to the Sullivan. It could be through a request for non-emergency assistance that maybe they get or don't get. We would still activate transportation to the Sullivan for them. So maybe they call asking for a hotel room, and that's not the first thing we deliver. We would get them to the Sullivan for intake services. But there's a multitude of ways that service gets activated. Just depends on what it is. In fact, we work with like Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center. If they have somebody that needs transportation back that can't be on the shuttle van, same thing with Alaska Native Medical Center. We do have the non-emergency transport to go out there. We note the non-emergency transport because there can be a little bit of delay, but it could be any community partner that reaches out to us asking us to provide transportation for services to the Sullivan, and we will. It sometimes can take a little bit because it gets fairly busy certain times of the day, but we do get out there and we do run it 24/7. The contract's for 3 vans, 24/7, the Anchorage Bowl.
That's fantastic. So if they dial like 211 and get into that system, is that how someone would, like an individual would call?
Yes, sir. That's one of the many ways I was referring to. It could come through 311. The police, maybe it's just a homeless person saying I'm cold and I need services. There's a lot of ways. It could be an officer comes across somebody, social workers, a multitude. Could come through a request through ASD, rare, but it could. We would still accept it. You don't have to come into that request in any certain way. There's a 24/7 dispatch number. 211 is one of the best ways to access it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And then we're running out of time for this part of the discussion, but I do want to put one more question into the record, and then hopefully at some point, Ms. Domboski, you'll be able to provide written responses to these follow-ups. And I'm happy if it's easier for you to just email you these follow-ups as well. But regarding the hub at the Sullivan, if folks don't want to go to the Sullivan for whatever reason, whether it's safety, etc., how do they get access to something like the hub if they don't want to go to the Sullivan? And then for folks who are in the Sullivan, what are the staffing hours at the hub? Are they posted? Are they known to people who would like to use those services? Would love to get a response to that at some point. Doesn't have to be right now.
Does that mean you'd prefer it not to be right now?
Well, since we have Mr. Drace, I'd be happy if he wants to respond to that quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's perfect time.
So yes, I have just a couple minutes before the meeting with the Salvation Army begins. The hub is the location for those services, and I think this is a great moment where this is exactly the point of the navigation center. And the hub's the same way. You don't have to be a beneficiary of any of the housing services to receive hub benefit services. There are other locations too where you can receive the services. There's the library, there's other navigation facilities and services through other agencies that we don't control. But the hub does not require you to be a resident of the Sullivan or our non-congregate sites to receive care. Additionally, we can put calls in to intensive case management workers for somebody that maybe had a unique situation. The hub operates 6 days a week, 8 to 5. On Sunday, that area is used for worship services, so we do not provide services on Sunday there. But 6 days a week, 8 to 5 at the hub, and there's a multitude of vendors that we have in there. It's not just 99+1. There's we allow anyone that wants to come set up and do outreach. So we have the VA there. There's just a multitude of different people that use that space to provide services to the clients that are both in and outside of our sheltering system.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I will say thank you, Mr. Gerace and Ms. Demboski, for the responses. I will send any follow-ups I have via email. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next part of our agenda, which is a FEMA update. So I did send written questions to the administration regarding this. Just basically the standard questions that I have wanted to know in this committee for months. So sort of what is the total dollar amount requested from FEMA for mass care, what have we received, what has been denied, what's in limbo, and then is there any update on the mass care data cleanup project? So the standard questions. So I don't know if you have any update on those, Ms. Demboski, and then I'd love if you can go into, you shared with me via email your concern regarding sort of the departments being asked by multiple committees or however you put it. So if you could go into that too, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. And just for the group's knowledge, I talked to the CFO this morning, and I don't know if it was hyperbole or literal, but we're getting asked multiple FEMA questions from multiple committees and multiple assembly members. And so the CFO thought it may be the most productive use of everyone's time if we just give a very detailed update at the Budget and Finance Committee, because that is an assembly committee of the whole. But for today, obviously, I'm happy to share the information that I've learned from the departments. So question number 1 was, what is the total dollar amount requested for FEMA reimbursement specific to mass care? To date, we've submitted a few different projects to FEMA containing mass care expenditures totaling $12,583,910.66. We've identified another $2,655,112.64 in mass care expenditures that we will have in future projects, but are not yet submitted to FEMA. We're continuing to identify additional expenditures as well. The second question by the chair is, what is the total dollar amount we've received in FEMA reimbursements specific to mass care? We have received $1,002,257.60 thus far. The third question, what is the total dollar amount requested in FEMA reimbursements specific to mass care that has been denied? No mass care expenditures have been officially denied by FEMA thus far. And the next question, number 4, is what is the total dollar amount requested in FEMA reimbursements specific to mass care that is in limbo, i.e. additional information requested waiting for a response from FEMA? Currently, we have $11,581,653.06, which is in, quote, limbo with FEMA. And then you asked if there was any update on the mass care data cleanup project. That is ongoing, but I will tell you, I just put ongoing on my response. But Alden and Amanda both have asked for more details of specifically what you're looking at. That we're assuming that you mean, mass care relating to the Sullivan, but we weren't exactly sure what you were asking.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and put myself in the queue to respond, and then I see Ms. Kennedy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Demboski, I just wanted you to repeat that number that you said that we have received from FEMA for mass care expenses. Could you give me that number again, please?
Yes. Yes,
Sounded
ma'am.
pretty low.
It is, well, it is when you consider that, the spend is nearly $3 million a month. It was 12,583,910.66 that we've actually received thus far.
Okay, I appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then for my part, first is I received these responses from Ms. Domboski via email earlier this morning. I will make sure that all assembly members have access to those responses, the written responses I received. And I will add those to the public version as well on the committee's website. And then I guess to your earlier comment regarding the sort of staff pressures, duplication of work, regarding getting FEMA reimbursement. I'm happy to have discussions with assembly leadership and the leadership of the Budget and Finance Committee regarding what it might look like to get a more detailed presentation for FEMA reimbursement. It doesn't matter to me personally what committee it happens in, as long as we have the discussion. That's all that matters to me. And then regarding mass care data cleanup, your question there, I would have to defer to the coalition as they are the ones that have highlighted this as something that the municipality should be aware of. So perhaps when the coalition gives their update, they can highlight any specific pieces regarding the mass care data cleanup. That would be helpful. Otherwise, are there any other folks who have questions regarding the FEMA reimbursement update? All right, seeing none, then we'll go ahead and move on to the coalition update. I'll turn it over to you, coalition.
Hello, thank you. Let me get to sharing the screen today. Okay, well, apparently I don't know where anything is right now. All right, thank you for bearing with me at this time. So we are here today again to report on our housing surge, which is those single adults over the age of 25 that are currently in our system. These numbers are as of actually January of 2022. I am saying December as I thought there might be some flexibility here on the numbers as we are still doing some reporting and compiling the data from the PIT count. I did hear, as I know it was a question at my last report, that the first or second week of March is around the time that that data would be available. Since we are speaking on data, I'll go ahead and just state that one of the things that we are needing with HMIS is that data wasn't being entered at certain mass care sites after September 30th. There are several conversations that 99+1 has been partnering with ACH on to get that data up to date. So the sites that 99+1 manage, that data is being entered and they are working diligently with ICA. The other sites, however, that are not managed by 99+1, such as the sockeye and the guest house, that data has not been entered and needs to be entered. And we know that COVID has taken a toll on some staffing and just looking for ways to resolve that. And that information does have a deadline. As you all know that with our PIT data, it is that 1 day count that we really need to have in the system, but by a certain timeline. So we are looking forward to having those conversations. But good news is that the project is nearly complete and a lot of hard work has been put into it by many of our partners, and we are very thankful for that. So that ties into these numbers here that January 2022, the number of adults over age 25 touching the system, not necessarily in our shelter, is 2,221. That is definitely an increase from December's numbers. Those that were touched by street outreach, 177, but again, those numbers I believe are going to be varied, and we will report on January's numbers in full when we get to our March meeting. And then very exciting that the number of those that were housed in the month of January is 28. Definitely proud to say that 4 of those are specifically went to the assisted living homes through our partnership with the ADRC, which is Anchorage Disability Resource Center, and many hours of work from our partners with intensive case management, with our Catholic social services. So I think in our case conferencing, we did like a yay and had a big celebration on having so many housed. If you don't know, it is a very long process, and to have 4 of them housed and really appreciate it. And there were tears. It's a great moment. So wanted you guys to feel that joy also during this report. Our bottlenecks and challenges remain.
Ms. Ware, if I can interrupt you really quick there.
Sure.
I have a question from Mr. Weldon, but before I do that, I failed to put a comment from the chat into the record, so I'll just do that right now. This was at 11:25 a.m. from Ms. Lisa Souter. Keep in mind, 211 only available Monday through Friday during daytime hours. With that, I'll turn to you, Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So looking at this chart, so you've got the total number of adults over age 25 served through housing surge in previous month. And what is the difference between being served through the housing surge and securing housing? Kind of that bottom row.
Okay, so those that are secured housing actually have a lease. So they have actually moved into a unit, or in this case with assisted living homes, the building that is considered their home, because there is an agreement that person experiencing homelessness would sign, or any person would sign an agreement with the home. So that is considered their house. And then when we're talking about the number 177, is that the number you're speaking of?
Right, yeah.
Those are actually the numbers where street outreach, so Choices, Rural Cap, and ACEH have went out into, wooded areas, non-sheltered environments, and actually given food, blankets, clothing, referrals, or assisted those folks that are out there with any kind of resources that they might need.
Okay, so it's very different from actually they may still be living in a tent then.
Correct.
Be in
Yes.
177.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And before you continue, there was a note put in the chat that apparently these specific slides aren't on the website, and I apologize for that. I will. There are 2 different presentations that the coalition is giving today. This is their update, and then they're giving another one specifically regarding to housing. So I will make sure that their update presentation is put on the website so members of the public are able to review it. But please continue, Ms. Ware.
Okay, thank you. And please, yes, stop me at any time, or I'm just going to roll through. Thanks. So our bottlenecks and challenges remain the same. We are continuing to work on the one that we stated was new last month, which is identification of resources within AHD that can be leveraged to support the facilitated exit strategy, HUD funding, alcohol tax, AHD operating dollars. We do understand, though, that there are new staff in AHD, and also, so that timeline has kind of morphed, and we hope to come back after we're able to meet and partner and truly see what resources are available. This slide is definitely different from last month. So as things come online, we are changing and keeping everyone up to date of the items that we have envisioned after the mass care closure on June 30th. So this is what we know as of today, or as of 2/3. And so as they come on, we will include those. So your slide hopefully gets bigger and more diverse. and also can encapsulate many more special populations, in essence of, as far as like who do they serve, where can they fit in? They can fit in multiple places instead of like this slide, just the 4 areas. Now remember, we are only talking about single adults. We have many more agencies in our community that do amazing things that are not captured here, so these are only for adults over the age of 25. We did report on this slide last month, but just bringing it back, that the solution is housing. We need more rental units. We definitely have lots of funding, which will be the next slide. But at this point, the lack of units and the low vacancy rates are definitely making it harder to move clients into those units. It is not impossible. It just creates more competition because we do have rental assistance available. We also, as the slide states, talks about a workforce issue. I think everyone is seeing that and feeling that, and the need for case management. We want our case managers, our partners in this, providers, to be comfortable with their caseloads. And if they have a loss of staffing or transition in staff, then that does make it harder for them to meet the problem statement, which is how do we transition approximately 800 people experiencing homelessness into suitable placements. This slide is about the funding. I think when we did the math, there was about $7 million that's in our community that we can utilize. Under the emergency housing vouchers, that is 9 years worth of assistance. I mention this because it is a significant amount of time that can also move with that individual. So if this certain housing that we get them into in May doesn't work out, then we can move them somewhere else and continue on within the program requirements, obviously. So underlined that, again, the funding for rental assistance is not the issue. It is the lack of available units. This slide goes more into depth about the sockeye specifically, and the need right now is about 150 individuals that we know of here at ACEH, where they can have the choice of staying in this facility and waiting to at least 6 to 18 months, because that is the process. It could be lower, but we know it's definitely about 6 months, and getting the care that they need while they're there. And this would be the PCS, which is personal care services, or PCA, personal care attendant services, while they're there. And then the most important thing, the case management, having that ongoing case management so they can continue to work the process to get into a permanent living situation. Not everyone wants an assisted living home. Some people do want to live independently, and we believe and we acknowledge client choice. And so if they want to live independently, then the case manager helps them to figure out that process and making sure that they have the resources they need once they are independently housed. There have been over 100 hours put into this project with Catholic Social Services, Agnew Beck, Rasmussen, the Mental Health Trust Authority, and of course the Coalition. And so we are just really can't wait for this project to come to fulfillment. There are some needs here. The Assembly has already approved the full utilization of the rooms over at the sockeye while we're going through this process. And then looking at asking the Assembly to utilize those HUD fundings through the CDBG CV funds and other resources so we can make sure that this project does pencil in. Then moving through a consolidated plan amendment process, so that way we are rounding it out and saying, yes, we have it and it is a go, and we can start filling those rooms through people that are already being served at our congregate and non-congregate sites. Then the last thing is working with the state of Alaska to help us streamline our Medicaid eligibility process and care coordination. It doesn't just impact those that are currently in our system, but others also. This slide addresses hotel conversions. Often I hear, but why are we doing hotel conversions? Actually, Anchorage is behind on hotel conversions. Other communities have been doing this for a long time. It is a wonderful way to get those that are experiencing homelessness the lease that they need, the rental history, um, the stability, and then saving the funds because they're renting in a hotel conversion at a lower cost. We can use other funding streams with this also. So you're layering on that assistance. I think you'll hear me say that a bunch of times. So someone, depending on the unit or the room, could use an EHV voucher and have rental assistance help and get help from the landlord housing program, all to be housed in this unit and hopefully stably housed. We don't want to just house people. We want to make sure that they can be housed for as long as they would like to be. It is hard to utilize these funds at this point when we're looking at like AHFC. We want to be good partners, but if we're not ready, then we can't be the greatest partner. So we just need to look at our assets and utilize those when we're working with Alaska Housing. As far as the assembly goes, we just want to utilize those 2021 home and home ARP funds. And I believe you guys are on the way, hopefully, to doing that. I know we've talked about it a lot. So that is just another plug for that. And then working with philanthropy or housing providers to identify owners and operators. They have been amazing, and HFC has walked with them in this process to make sure that we are finding the right facilities to house folks. And last month we stated we would add to our slide the family cold weather shelter for January awakes, and this is just awakes referrals as they are answering the phone after 211 is no longer answering calls, as I think someone already mentioned in the chat. So 29 families in January have called. Next month, we are planning to give you more statistics on family size, like the time of day, the repetition. Does the family call twice in 1 month? Are they calling, 3 times before their house? We feel like that is important information to give you the full story of family cold weather shelter. Awake is also able to provide cab vouchers so families can get to hotels or also get to Neighbor Works, who has a program that can enroll families in a longer term hotel accommodation, which also frees up the municipality to be able to pay for the family to stay in a hotel, a different family to stay in the hotel. So definitely appreciate those partnerships coming online. Neighbor Works is also doing the coordinated entry assessments, again, working on stable housing because we're not just looking to house them now, we're looking on how can we make sure that they're not returning into our system. The suggestion here would be to decrease the time to house someone in the hotel once the referral or call is made to, let's say, Awake or 211. Currently, from what we know, it's taking about 2 days for that to happen. Okay. I thank you for your time, and I know that many of you have heard some of these slides before, so thank you for hearing it again.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Ware, for the presentation. I'll pause really quick, see if there are any questions from members before we move on. All right, so not seeing any, then we'll go ahead and move on to our next presentation, and we're a little bit behind schedule, so thanks folks for presenters for staying a little later than I had imagined. So next we have the overview of housing resources. So I will go ahead and kick this off. So my sort of goal and purpose for this time really is to have a discussion in this committee, a very overarching discussion, 60,000 foot level regarding housing. As we just saw in the presentation, there is a continual assertion that housing is the solution to homelessness. And while I think that's, myself, I think that's a little bit simplified. I do think that the coalition has provided a compelling case that while we are working on all parts of the homelessness response system, housing continues to be a large barrier to the work. So with that in mind, and given the recent committee change that was made last year, I believe it was, to change the committee from just the homelessness committee, which, you know, since its inception in 2012 or 2013, whenever it was, you know, the committee has been the homelessness committee. Last year, thanks to the leadership of the prior chair, you know, there was the idea, which the assembly approved of really expanding the idea and scope of this committee to incorporate housing. And shortly after that change, the committee had its first discussion on housing policy specific to ADUs. Folks will likely remember that Sightline report and the discussion we had in the Housing and Homelessness Committee. But otherwise, we really haven't delved too much into housing in this committee as it pertains to policy. We've talked a lot about housing as it pertains to specific projects, but we really haven't talked about it in terms of policy. So this is an attempt to start that. Really, tip of the iceberg. It shouldn't be seen as anything more than an introduction to our housing system. And I want to be sort of specific, our housing system as it relates to our homeless response system. The goal, of course, is getting this committee involved in some way in this policy work, especially considering the potential for federal monies that are coming our way or have been coming our way. Of course, there are others involved in facets of this work. You know, for me, the Community Economic Development Committee is the home for sort of the overarching housing discussion. No pressure, Mr. Weddleton, Miss Allard. So this is definitely not meant to duplicate the work that's done in that committee, because no one has time for that, but strategically to add on to what's being done and to, you know, focus in and hone in on what I hope to be sort of our part of the solution here. So with that, there's a few parts to this overview. First, we're going to start with an overview of the housing market as it relates to the homelessness response system from the coalition. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the status of new development and the Anchorage Home Builders Association and the Cook Inlet Housing Authority. We'll go into that. Then we'll just sort of have a roundtable from the various presenters of some of the issues that they believe are sort of at play here, and then we'll have a committee discussion to end. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the coalition again. Ms. Ware.
Actually, Mr. Verrett, this is Meg Zalatel, Interim Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and I am here only in that role as the Interim Executive Director. I'll be presenting on behalf of the coalition.
Okay, great. I just want to make one statement then, Ms. Zalatel, and that is that as chair, I think it's absolutely appropriate for you to present on this topic as the Interim Executive Director, and that is my ruling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. So I am sharing my screen now. Are you able to see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So I'm going to move through these pretty quick, understanding we have a lot to get through, but you have the information. So really want to start with where Alaska is in order to be able to afford rent in Anchorage. And right now that's $23.74. And what's really interesting about this resource is we can actually break it down by zip code. And so I've provided not only the overview at the state level, but when we start to look in particular neighborhoods in Anchorage, you start to see what it takes to pay rent in Anchorage. And this should be noted that the current minimum wage in Anchorage or in Alaska is $10.34. So there's your comparison point. So it is really difficult to be able to pay fair market rents in Anchorage right now. We layer that with vacancy rates, and we really see why we're getting into a housing crisis. You'll see from 2020 to 2021, vacancy rates dropped in Anchorage. But not only did they drop in Anchorage, they dropped in outlying communities. And as we know, when folks can't find what they need in some of our smaller communities, they often come to hubs or other urban centers such as Anchorage. So that vacancy rate continues to get squeezed. And then So then putting that in the context of the work, around homelessness, if we look at particular types of housing, this is permanent supportive housing beds per census area. And so you see Anchorage has 2 beds per 1,000 residents. And if you think about that, just in terms of looking at mass care or the homeless prevention response system of about 1,000 individuals in shelter, we would have 2 permanent supportive housing beds. We know the need is much greater than that. Home for Good, a program most of you are very familiar with, which is a permanent supportive housing program, is aiming to serve 150 individuals. So units tend to be right in the crux of being able to get people appropriate services. And then rapid rehousing, which is one of our greatest and least expensive interventions to combat homelessness, you can see we have 0.42 beds per 100,000 residents. So we really are struggling to ensure that there's enough housing generally, affordable housing, and then appropriate housing to meet the needs and circumstances of the residents of Anchorage. So the continuum of services to respond to homelessness includes several paths to housing, and that's why I did highlight the permanent supportive housing in addition to rapid rehousing. And you've seen this graphic before, but like to put that within the context of the overall homelessness prevention response system for single adults. And so we've got challenges and there are some responses. Big challenge is vacancy rates. You're hearing about it a lot because it is just an enormous challenge. So diversification of housing types, and you're seeing some of that with the mass care exit strategy and the opportunity to do hotel conversions and looking at workforce housing or single rental occupancies. The lack of affordable units, again, trying to figure out ways to bring on units that allow us to leverage that federal relief and rental assistance. Finding owners for capital projects such as new shelters and hotel conversions. That has been an interesting challenge in implementing the mass care exit strategy. Is these projects don't often pencil, and they don't often pencil in the long term, particularly around maintenance and operations. So there's exploration going on about creating a community land trust that is specific to owning properties that serve extreme low income individuals and special needs. These exist in a lot of other communities. So seeing if this tool other communities have deployed is a right fit for Anchorage. And then the immediacy of the need. The need is known now, not just because we're exiting mass care, but you probably have all heard a story. I just had a friend reach out saying, I'm ready to move back to Anchorage. I have a job opportunity, and she can't find a rental unit. So how do we do that? It's going to only be solved through public-private partnerships. So I hope that helps set the stage a little bit for your conversation today, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Just want to note that Ms. Allard had to leave for another meeting. So what we're going to do is I will go ahead and pause, and after each of these portions of our discussion, I will see if members have questions. I think that'll be the best way to get this done. So I have Mr. Weddleton in the queue.
Thanks. So Meg, you used a statistic that we have 0.42 beds per 1,000 residents. Do you mean 0.42 available beds or affordable, or what's the 0.42?
Yeah, so the 0.42 is that many permanent supportive housing beds currently in existence per residence. And if we go back and we look at, this is how we create the gap analysis. We identify the need and what we have, and then there's the gap in between. And so we don't have enough to even fulfill project, that's been funded, which is Home for Good, which identified 150 individuals of needing permanent supportive housing.
Okay, so that's 0.42 subsidized beds per 1,000.
That are permanent supportive housing. So they're housing with services that meet individual needs. A permanent supportive housing, it's a bit of a term of art, but yeah, for that particular purpose.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see anyone else in the queue. Thank you, Ms. Alatel. All right, so moving on to the next portion of our discussion. So unfortunately, the representative from the Home Builders Association had to drop off. I will see if we can get AHBA to come to a future meeting because I do think they have some important perspective to share. And I think they were particularly interested in this conversation. But we do have, I believe, folks from the Cook Inlet Housing Authority. Mr. Lehman, are you with us still?
I am, Mr. Rivera.
Great. All right, well, go ahead, Mr. Lehman.
You bet. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a screen to share real quick, and I have a PowerPoint. So thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly, MOA staff. What you should see in front of you is a very brief PowerPoint. My name is Gabe Lehman. I am the Executive Vice President for Cook Inlet Housing and the President of Cook Inlet Lending Center. We are a regional housing authority and affiliated nonprofit lending institution that serve the Anchorage region. So we were asked to present a little bit on the status of new development in the MOA, and certainly the home builders can give you a better, broader perspective of the overall housing market in town beyond affordable housing. What we can share, however, is really a conversation focused on what's happening in terms of permitting.
Actually, Mr. Lehman, if I can interrupt you really quick. So there was
Please.
a comment in the chat that these slides are not on the website, and actually they are. These slides are under the February 16th, 2022 meeting, and it's labeled the Assembly Housing Update. So for members of the public who would like to see these slides, they are online and available for anyone who wants to see them. Thanks. Please continue.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we're going to show you here is about the simplest snapshot of data on housing activity that we can provide. So this looks at permitting activity in 2021. And what you can see here is that 203 single family homes were permitted as of December 2021 for the calendar year of 2021. 26 duplexes, that means 56 total units, and 51 total units in multifamily buildings of 3 or more units. What's really important to note about these figures is that multifamily construction is stagnant. The data showed 51 permitted multifamily units, and I can tell you that Cook Inlet Housing Authority permitted 51 multifamily units last year, all of which were located in Spenard. That's concerning. We are seeing essentially no new multifamily construction beyond the relatively limited amount of multifamily affordable housing construction that Cook Inlet Housing Authority has been able to sponsor. This shows you that all in all, Cook Inlet Housing Authority's housing represented about 18% of the overall permitted residential development last year. What I can also tell you is that the opportunities for development of new affordable housing in Anchorage are relatively limited by funding source opportunities. The traditional program that is utilized to develop affordable housing in Alaska and throughout the country is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Those resources are allocated by the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation through a competitive process called the GOAL, Greater Opportunities for Affordable Living Program. That program really aims to have geographic diversity across the state of Alaska, making it pretty unlikely that you will see resources concentrated in any one community from year to year. What that typically means is Anchorage could expect to receive, if a project in Anchorage is funded through this process, typically somewhere between 30 and 60 new units of affordable housing. It's unlikely to provide any more than that on a year-to-year basis. And there will be some years in which an Anchorage-based project is not funded, meaning no new units. A little bit of good news for you. The Alaska Housing Finance Corporation recently provided a notice of intent to award funds for its most recent GOAL process. And that indicated that they do intend to fund the Providence House, Alaska permanent supportive housing development. If that is indeed funded and goes to fruition, we're talking about 51 units of new permanent senior focused supportive housing in Midtown. All 51 of those units would serve individuals who were previously unhoused. All would be income restricted, and essentially 80% of those units are targeted for elders age 55 plus. Of course, there is a development process. Completion would not occur for that new development until 2024. So that's a little bit of the good news, bad news. We are seeing some development, in the near future. That is new permanent supportive housing that will help contribute to a portion of the needs that Ms. Zalatel helped to highlight. But the reality is that the amount of resources available for this work are limited. And with current resources that have been on the table year to year, Anchorage should not expect the addition of more than about 30 to 60 new units of affordable housing annually. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lehman. Okay, so I actually have Mr. Weddleton in the queue for you. Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
So looking at this, some of the things like last night we looked at selling some land that's zoned R4. We rezoned some land next to North Star Elementary that's also, I think, probably that high. I think that was also to R4. But these are higher density multifamily zonings. Are we getting, I don't know if there's, this is probably not for you to be able to answer, but I look at those and go, oh, good, we'll get apartments there. Is that not realistic, or how do we make that happen?
Yeah, through the chair, Assemblymember Weddleton, it's a great question. I would essentially refer back to work that has been done by the Live Work Play group over a number of years that identified some fairly substantial barriers in Title 21 and otherwise to the ultimate development of higher density, potentially more affordable housing. And what I could do is distribute some of those resources, some of those findings and recommendations out to the Assembly. But they date back to 2017, 2018, I believe. None of it is really new information. What I would say is that I think we see a lot of front end work to potentially acquire these properties, but often it's not until a developer has a property under contract and they begin to do the due diligence that they begin to really understand the fairly substantial barriers to developing denser multifamily housing in Anchorage and actually coming out in the black at the end of the day. We've seen a number of these potential projects advance into early stages where acquisitions were talked about or even made. And then those prospective developers sometimes realize that they can't find a way to actually bring that project to fruition.
Well, I guess it's good for us to hear that, but I'm sad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Lehman. So now we're going to move on to the next part of our discussion, which is just an overview of issues as the presenters see them. So I'll give you the order. We'll start with CHA again, so Mr. Lehman, then we'll go to the coalition to see if they have anything to add. I think you did present some in your slides already, but if you have anything to add, this would be the opportunity for the coalition. And then I believe we do have a representative from the Homelessness Leadership Council, and if they have anything to add regarding any policy issues or other issues for the Assembly to consider, that would be helpful to bring to us at this point. So I'll go ahead and start with Mr. Lehman.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I will go back to sharing my screen here, so bear with me for a quick moment. All right, and we'll do this here. So let me get to the right area. All right, so in this, there are essentially 2 points that I'm going to make here about housing challenges. The first really talks to the fact that housing individuals who have experienced homelessness is certainly a step in the process, but too often we get tripped up talking about housing being the end outcome and the final solution. There is a lot more work that needs to be done after many individuals who have previously experienced homelessness are placed in housing. And to make this point, I'm going to share some data from 2017 to 2019, pre-pandemic. Cook Inlet Housing Authority really tracked what was happening to our residents who had transitioned out of homelessness, and looked at that data and compared it to what was happening with our residents who had not previously experienced homelessness. And what we learned was pretty interesting. I'll go ahead and move forward here. So we have approximately 1,800 housing units, and the overwhelming majority of those are located in Anchorage. What we saw was that our overall tenant population was about 20% comprised of individuals who came to us from an unhoused situation. However, when we looked at our evictions, we realized that nearly half of the individuals that were evicted from our housing were individuals who were previously unhoused. We also looked at the time between when an individual came into our housing and when that eviction proceeded. And what you'll see here is that for individuals who had previously been housed before coming to us and becoming our residents, you were talking about nearly 3 years on average before that eviction took place. For previously unhoused individuals, that was a much quicker turnover. You're talking about roughly 1 year and 2 months before those evictions moved forward. I would also use this opportunity to emphasize that for Cook Inlet Housing Authority, we're not a traditional landlord. We have the ability to be a bit more patient with individuals who either have behavioral issues that impact their tenancy, or who struggle to pay their rent. Out of our portfolio of 1,800 units, pre-pandemic, we averaged somewhere between 10 and 15 evictions per year, which is extremely low. What I would say is that you are going to see a much lower level of tolerance, or an ability to tolerate some of the concerns that come about among private sector landlords who are trying hard in many instances to work with individuals who have been housed out of an unhoused situation. And all of this just is kind of shared to highlight the fact that we have learned that there is a critical time period that lasts somewhere between 18 to 24 months after certain individuals who have experienced homelessness are housed, where they do remain vulnerable and they require additional supports. If we set our measure of success at simply the number of individuals who are placed in a particular unit, and we don't as a community acknowledge that those individuals require some additional supports and resources for this often 18 to 24 month period, we're probably not doing ourselves justice. Many of those individuals may ultimately return to homelessness. The one other barrier that we did want to highlight today is something that Ms. Zalatel also highlighted earlier in this conversation. There is a massive barrier to sustainably operate, not necessarily just affordable housing, but really supportive housing. It's very easy to feel like we have achieved some success when we've managed to pull together the capital stack necessary to acquire or rehabilitate a property. But the hard reality is that the difficult work then kind of begins once that building has been acquired. You have to find an operator who understands that operating model. You have to make sure that operator has the resources necessary to operate these facilities, which cost money to operate. You're talking about supportive services like case management that are much more intensive than what you see for a traditional affordable housing environment. And so I would really encourage you as a legislative body to think about, as we have these conversations about permanent supportive housing and the exodus from mass care, what it looks like to not simply place those individuals, but to ensure that there is a very serious conversation about the operational resources that are going to be necessary to support those solutions in the long term. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions that folks may have.
Great. Thank you again, Mr. Lehman. All right. So with that, I think the next person in line to discuss any policy issues or other considerations you believe we should consider is the coalition. So who from the coalition would like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Ms. Zalatel. So I'm just going to add on a few things to what Mr. Lehman said. I think he really highlighted the ability to get these multifamily housing projects moving. And so I want to talk a little bit about is other tools we have that could potentially address these challenges that are just getting off the ground, or that we could look at deploying on a larger scale. One of those is the Landlord Housing Partnership, really partnering with private landlords across the community to be able to mitigate their risk, provide incentives, and open up hopefully additional housing stock, and take advantage of the opportunity to layer on supportive services for independent housing, whether that's case management, assistance with security deposits, helping coordinate, making sure they have supportive services necessary to meet their needs and be successful in that housing. I think Mr. Lehman's statistics as presented are stark, but we can take those to then be more proactive in creating programs to address those needs from the outset. Each success we are able to have with an independent landlord is one we can hopefully use to recruit another landlord and another, and then we increase the overall housing stock. Similarly, we have to think a little bit beyond some of the traditional housing, and that's really where hotel conversions come in, where we're able to expand this continuum of housing, and this is the kind of a middle ground between independent housing and permanent supportive housing, because these projects are often staffed, lighter touch, and have the ability to layer on services. And there's so much that comes with that door in a single rental occupancy. Hopefully a new start, a good rental history, opportunity to save some money because the rents are usually a little bit lower, so that you can then that individual can put their best foot forward in more competitive rental programs. And the last thing I'll say is all of these things have to be done together. Each part of this continuum is as important as any other part of the continuum. And so it's really going to take a public-private partnership across many sectors. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And then I believe last, before we get to any committee discussion, and I fully realize we're quickly running out of time, is Michelle Brown. If you had anything to add, now would be the time.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. This is Michelle Brown. I'm Senior Fellow at the Rasmussen Foundation, and our partners at the Coalition and Cook Inlet Housing did an excellent job of laying out the issues, so I won't repeat any of that. We have a housing committee as part of the Homeless Leadership Council that is looking at the number of policy potential avenues to increase available and affordable housing along the entire continuum of housing needs, and we'll be happy to partner with you in the future on those. In the more immediate thing, I want to pick up a few items that were previously raised. And that is, this unusual situation we find ourselves in now where we have rental dollars, but we don't have units. So we have to do our work to get units on, as has been said very eloquently. The second thing is these units have to operate with some horizon of sustainability. And when I say units, I want it to be clear that I mean units and whatever level of support services are needed, because as has been pointed out, housing is a solution to homelessness, but there needs to be supports with the people in there for whatever period of time are needed. And this issue has really come to a head around the facilitated plan. And while we are able to raise capital dollars to acquire buildings, what we are finding is that potential building owners and operators are wary of stepping in because of the way the landscape of funding works. It's developed over time to be so deconstructed from so many sources that it's multiple people's full-time job just to hobble together the money from year to year. So one of the things that we really are focusing on at the Homeless Leadership Council is how do we, as a community, braid our resources to address these needs, both for capital acquisition as well as operations. And I think that's a really ripe area for this committee to consider, because we have to look at public-private partnerships. Every funding stream has a lot of restrictions from its source. But how do we work together to acquire the necessary new units and to have a horizon of sustainability that will incent people to step up and do this work to provide the services we all agree we need. So we look forward to partnering with you and working on these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. All right, so with that, I think what I'm going to do, rather than try to artificially constrain this conversation, which I think should be a robust one of, given this information, how do we as a committee want to explore this? How do we want to take action? Because for me, that's the most important thing. Rather than talking circles, I want to see what action we can actually take. And move forward in solutions. I'm gonna look and see if we can do a part 2 of this in March, where we will incorporate a lengthier and more robust committee discussion on this topic, given that we only have 7 minutes now left in our meeting today. I was warned that we could probably spend half a day on this topic, so my apologies for not making sure we had enough time today. Okay, so with that, I really want to thank Mr. Lehman, Ms. Zolotel, and Ms. Brown for your thoughts. Hopefully members will be able to percolate on those, and we will have a good discussion at next month's committee meeting regarding these presentations. And then hopefully at next month's committee meeting, we'll be able to bring back a representative from the Home Builders Association so that they could add their 2 cents, because I know they had some thoughts they wanted to bring into the fold. With that, I'll go ahead and move on our agenda to the facilitated process update. And then I'm gonna cut out the review of the draft goals and priorities. Instead, what I will do is I will just email the members my revisions to the draft goals and priorities, and then we will do a formal review of that at next month's committee meeting. And then we will do final audience participation with whatever time we have left. So with that, I will start with members of the assembly who are part of the facilitated process. If you'd like to provide any update, then I'll turn over to any members of the administration if they are on and part of the facilitated process to provide any update. So who from the assembly wants to unmute and get started?
I'll jump in quick. We haven't met for a while. We're meeting today after this meeting. And I just wanted to let folks know that I'm planning to step out of the facilitated negotiated working group. And I've been in discussions with Mr. Rivera to step in on my behalf and take over for me. And so, well, it's been a very enlightening process. I think it's time for new energy.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, Mr. Weddleton, did you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you.
And then if there are any members of the administration who are part of the facilitated process, I'll open it up for you to add anything.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe anybody's on from the administration side for that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then we'll go ahead and move on to final audience participation. First, I want to see if Mr. Oliva was able to join us, and I will give him priority before opening up to any other members. So, Mr. Oliva, if you are on the line, it's *6 to unmute yourself. All right, not hearing Mr. Oliva, then I'll open it up to any other members of the public. You'll have 3 minutes, and I will go ahead and time you. So if you'd like to speak, please unmute yourself and state your name for the record. Again, it's *6 if any members of the public would like to participate. Just give it another second. All right, seeing and hearing no one, then again, thanks everyone for a great committee meeting today, and appreciate members of the administration for attending and other presenters. With that, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting.